Hey, Don, the Auction Professor. Today I thought I would go over the tools of the trade. What I've got on the table here are probably the most common things I use, not every day, but at least several times a week, every single week that I do eBay. A lot of this stuff here I literally got while I was picking as well, too. Garage sales, and even some of it came from savers. But it's all stuff that literally you're going to use when you're doing collectibles, vintage paper, costume jewelry and things like that, because there'll be times when there will be something that'll be broken, snapped, or that you'll just need to be able to handle better than just normal fingers. But I'm going to just show you just real quickly here today just some of the items that I do get. I do a lot more than most people do in the paper and collectibles and vintage jewelry and things like that. There's nothing wrong with fixing up things or addressing them as long as you would list them that way. If you're just reattaching a hoop or a clip or something, I wouldn't call that repairing it. I would just call putting it back in place. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I can't see it. In some instances, you can, add another piece to it from another vintage item and then repair like a piece of jewelry or something. Gluing basic things back together that were originally glued, that's not really doing much to it either. You might just put that it was re-glued in the description, but I never alter something without specifically stating, a disclaimer, hey, it was fixed, or, I just re-glued something back on. Most people aren't going to care because it's going to need to be re-glued on after so long gluing stuff fails. I'll get the basics out of the way, obviously. I always keep a pair of clippers for clipping wire and things like that around. They come in handy all the time. Again, I use these all the time. This sits in the little bin I have over there with just stuff like this. Same with, a bigger pair of needle nose pliers that also has a secondary clip. And I always use these. I've got several pairs. I've got one that's bent up on the top that looks like an L on the end. And, a couple of smaller ones than this. These come in handy. This is the one I use the most. And you can use that in conjunction with things like this. And this is a Savers piece. I got this at Savers when they were opened. You can tighten these things down and, move them any way you want. They have clips, so basically you can mount something onto this and you'll be able to twist, move it around. If you need a secondary, loop on it or something, or another magnification, I've got a second one too. Actually, I think I have a third one of these too. But you can slide these all over the place, use them in conjunction with these to fix all kinds of things. I fix a lot of the necklaces and jewelry. If something, a clip is missing or something, I might shorten something and list that, damaged and it's now serviceable. Things like that. Or, just in general, you're putting something together, or a lot, you want to take a locket off something, or separate a couple pieces of toys, or whatever the case may be. These things come in really handy. I use these at least once a week, these themselves. And it comes in handy even just to use the magnifying glass on them. But that's one thing there. This is a balloon, it's called. I don't know if that's the model or what, but that's what I see these called. We picked this up at a antique mall. I paid $5 for it. It literally, you can set it on the item, magnifies it 5x. It's pretty neat. If you do a lot of stuff like we do, this comes in very handy, especially for the like poster stamps and the smaller items. But that's pretty cool. If you don't like the loupes, these are actually jeweler loupes. This is my first one that I ever had. I've had it forever, like 20 years. These are like $8-10. This one's solid metal, so this one's probably better. But this one here I actually like better because it's more comfortable if you're carrying it and you throw it in your pocket. This is like a 1940s Bausch & Lomb jeweler's loupe, and it has actually 3 separate lenses on it too. And this one actually does far better than the newer professional one. And I've got a couple of these. I was lucky enough to find these at a little thrift store. They had like 8 of them in a little box, and I bought every one they had for $1 a piece. And my kids carry these around too, and a couple other people I've given these to. But these are awesome. I like the vintage ones. I don't really care if it's new or not. I don't mind it being vintage. It kind of adds to the enjoyment of going out and doing stuff like this. I semi-like the steampunk, so this is kind of like a steampunk. It's got Art Deco designs down the side, but this is early, as I said, like 40s, 1940s, maybe even 30s. It's Bakelite. But this is what I use. If you don't like those two, there's one of these too you can get. It's like a pocket magnifier, and this is vintage too. And the wife carries this one around sometimes, so that's just what we use. And then there's this. Now this, most people probably wouldn't know what this is. You might have seen them before at sales. This is a paper press. Now I've got 3 sizes of paper presses. This one's small. It's for like stamps and things up to maybe 4 by 4. I've got a larger one that you can do postcards in that'll handle like 6 by 8, I believe. And then I've got one of these, a real big slab one that will do 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. Now these are expensive, so unless you're going to be doing this for a while, I wouldn't go rushing out to buy one of these. If you would, you can buy one of the smaller ones, and then you can do half of a card at a time and half at another time. That's for worked cards and ones that won't lay flat. You can keep them in here. It's a time-consuming thing, so don't waste your time just on every single card you find. But sometimes paper as well, too. You can iron it and then flatten it, and it'll look really nice and crisp. I wouldn't say that's altering it, because all you're doing is addressing the issues that were in it originally. It's not changing the structure, altering the material in any way. It's just flattening it out. You know, you can even say it's flattened out, or that it's been flattened. That's a legitimate thing to do. You know, like archives will do it, and museums. I've taken art classes, obviously. I've taken art classes, and some of the classes covered, things like filling in and restoration and repairs. So I do have some experience. I have done this enough to say that, I do it on a professional level. I don't mount on cloth or anything like that, but I'll fix paper and things along that line. Some things can be fixed, some things can be, addressed. But again, you want to say what you're doing when you're repairing these. I'd show you the bigger ones, but they're actually in use right now. When you're flattening something, you might have it in this for like a week, so it really just depends on what it is, and there's a process to do it. It's not like something just easy. You just don't cram it in here, but I'll maybe talk about it if anybody's interested. But I do use these quite often, at least once a week something is in one of these, for the whole week. So tweezers, I use a lot of. Now everybody, just tweezer is a tweezer. There's different kinds of tweezers. This one has a flat edge, and it's semi-rounded. This is for very specific, because you can use these for jewelry or for, numerous things, even coins if you're careful. And then this one's actually pointed, literally pointed in every way, shape, or form, for picking up little small things. And this one is for like paper, and it's actually like turned. It's actually got a slight bend to it, so you can slide it under it and then pick it up carefully. Now this is great for stamps, cards, postcards, anything you have a problem with. Now I bought out a huge stamp assortment from a closed down stamp store, and I got lucky. I have like a case of these. I've got like 100 of these. There's probably one of these anywhere you can look in our house. There's one of these laying around. And the same goes for this one, because this one was at the same facility. But I've talked about it where we buy out businesses. I just got lucky enough to buy out a stamp place and have a ton of neat stuff in there, books and catalogs and supplies in general. But these I use all the time. Other things are cutters. If you're going to do print ads, these are awesome for print ads. There's different kinds you can get, different varieties. This is Friskers, and I think this is Westcott. They both have their drawbacks. I've got a couple small size paper cutters that are about half this too that I use for some things. But again, with print ads, there's nothing wrong with trimming them down, because you are literally selling a trimmed out piece of paper. So I use these quite often. These are the best. It's just a matter of sliding it back and forth. Craft section, you can get these at Walmart, like 12 bucks. So if you're going to do paper at all, I would recommend getting these. If you're going to cut a card down that wasn't originally, cut that size, you want to list that it was trimmed in the listing. Or list it as a scrap. If you put scrap in the title, it's not listing it as a full-fledged card, or scrap card is fine. Anything with scrap in the title automatically insinuates that it is, leftover, reused, reparsed, whatever the case may be. But I use these all the time. I've got a couple of them. You can actually replace these blades as well, too. So, again, they're good items to get Walmart. Most everything I've showed you so far, other than the magnifiers and the presses, you can get at Walmart. The presses, you can get them in, the supply section on stamps sometimes. Sometimes you'll just see, a heavy press or something along that line. If you buy a vintage one or a used one, you just want to make sure that the bed is not messed up. There's no pitting or anything like that. It's not rusted. You want a clean bed that's flat and smooth. You can't fix those very well at all. It's not something you can repair, those presses. There's just not messing with them is the best bet. I have rulers, and every ruler that I have, I try to use ones that have a see-through clear area so you can see the item better. This one actually magnifies as well too. I don't care if it's from another industry or whatever. I buy a lot of, obviously big art supply lots, and I use a lot of the art supplies. So these, I've got a bunch of these. The kids use them. Everybody here in the house uses these. These are awesome. It's better than, just a, 12-inch ruler as well too, and it covers most items. And again, it has a clear area so you can honestly see what the item is. And then same along here. Now these I hunt down too, but again, this came in a lot, off of an auction or one of my pickers or something. I don't mind paying $1 for these either, even if that's what I had to pay for these, because I use these all the time. And the see-through ones to measure something is always the best, because you can honestly judge where it falls, as opposed to, any other issues with like a wooden ruler you can't see through. So just FYI. I know everybody has screwdriver sets at the house, so no big deal. But this one's different than the most of them. This is actually a computer repairman's version of it, basically. It has all the hex bits and all that on the ends, the stars and the whole works that you would use for like opening cases for things. And these I use for opening all those weird oddball cases and old toys, and like the music box toys that you need to open up to either replace a battery or something. But that's what I use these for, and they usually open up pretty much anything I can think of. I spent extra on this just to get one that does it and has the extra hex. Each one of these has a different size on it. So there's one for the standard, and then everything else is a specific oddball hex or size. Even the screwdriver set here are set for real or deep ones too. And with the setup here on one of these sets here, you can get into the deep crevices. Like on the early toys, they have like a tube where the screw is embedded or screwed in way at the bottom of the tube, and the only way to get down there is have something really fine. And this has one of the finest shafts that you can use to get down into that. So that's what these are for. That's why I use these. And when you do use these and you're taking out screws and things, even if it's something you're not going to keep the item, I always hang on to all those little screws. I've got like a bin of like 2 or 3 pounds of all those tiny little screws for every little thing you can possibly imagine. I sell those screw sets too. The people buy those in big bulk lots too. So that's just something that you can think about there. I'll get these out of the way here too. Now I touch up things sometimes, and I'll even list that in there. I'll touch up things that have like black, the coloring worn off. This is more like printed material and things, but I'll list what I do, in touched up or retouched up or professionally touched up. I can pretty much say that because I'm a professional artist and I do know the other workings. Now I collect vintage items for artwork. That's the one item that I do personally collect a lot of, and I use them all. So I've taken this one apart. This is, the old style. I can't think what the style the airbrush is, but it has the outside chamber. These new are like, $400 or $500 for a real good one. This is a Pache, top of the line, 1930s, and I repaired it. I cleaned it all up. It's a nice Bakelite handle, but I use this one and to touch up. And you can colorize things and do all kinds of stuff with these in the field. It's a good thing. I got these again used, obviously, from a sale. I think I got $5 a piece into them. But that's what I use. It's a Thayer and Chandler, and these things have been around for well over 100 years. This is an 1897 Thayer and Chandler. This is an original one. It still works. May not look super nice on the outside, but I don't worry about polishing those up. I love using the vintage stuff to do these. It's a thrill for me, especially knowing that I've got these things working. But that's just, what I use. This one I don't use. I have used it, so I know it works, but this one's just pretty much a collectible. But all this stuff comes in handy for doing this, for touching up, on and on kinds of stuff, holiday items and whatnots. And a good assortment of these is always good to have, the mixing cups and all. But I keep these around. You can get a basic one. This is like $30 or $40, I probably got this one used. Yeah, this one's used too. But it came with all the stuff to it. And you can get aerosol cans. You can get a tank really cheap. I've got a little compressor. I've got a big compressor. Then I've got like a 20-gallon tank that I can just walk in the house and not have to hear the compressor. With something like this, those things run for a while. But you know, you don't have to be artistic to be able to use these either. Anybody can do these with just a little bit of practice. And there's untold things that you can do in using these. Even repainting things. Even, you know, doll industry uses these. They'll retouch up dolls. They'll do repaints. Depending on what you sell, if you're selling vintage, these can come in handy with all kinds of things. Repairing or replacing a leg to something, or touching up paint, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes touching up something, as long as you list that it's been repaired or touched up, will make the item worth so much more money than it is without being repaired or touched up. So as long as you list that that's what was done to it, it's fair game to do too. So let me set these down here. I fix things, my son casts and all kinds of things. So we do metal work and things where you might have to sand, fix, or file. I've got all kinds of vintage brushes that we use to clean things, metal on one side and standard on the other. I use painter spatulas to open up things and to cut tape and all kinds of things like that. I've got dental pick tools that I use to scrape off dirt and grime in between crevices of things and antiques that we sell, you know, smalls and just whatever you see in my videos. Some of it's been cleaned up and some of it I clean up with tools just like this. I've got miniature files, you know, triangular files. I've got a whole file set that I use to clean up and cut out metal and cut off, you know, residual plastics and all kinds of things like that. These all come in handy. And along that line too, I've got sets of X-Acto knives and blades, and again, these come in handy all the time. I use these constantly. I've got many sets of them. I use them for many different reasons. Most of these sets came from picks that I had, you know, $1 or $2 from a picker, you know, a thrift store find, a flea market find. This set I use all the time. You know, I've actually had to replace things in this set just because I've used it that much. And I've used it just literally for eBay for most of the part, for all these items you see. And I keep, you know, little odds and ends. I keep like styluses that I can use to carve out and get out little junk that's in crevices and things and metal items. Varnishers for putting in items that need to be re-glued or something. This is a heavyweight item. This thing really does the trick. Little pick items too. You know, specialty X-Acto blades. You know, this is a vintage one. I love the vintage ones, as I said. Regular X-Acto blades. Now these, I've got a bunch of these too. These are like camera brushes. Now I use these too very exclusively. I keep one of these near my listing area constantly to dust off stuff, or even just to dust off the camera. Same with here, same thing again. These aren't for ladies, you know, makeup or anything like that. These are literally solid brass brushes for camera and stuff, and I use these for my camera as well. I've got one that's just for camera, and then another one for stuff like vintage stuff. That way I'm not going to scratch the lens. If you're going to do records, these come in handy. I've got all kinds of versions of these. I usually just sell bunches when I get so many of them, but I keep them as well too, so I can line up a whole bunch of records just to pop them on the turntable without having to worry. Just depends on which turntable I'm using, but these come in handy. I've talked about the Expo. I will put a link to the Expo video up here. This is a big insider info one for you. You will need to watch the video here up above. This is a must-see for you if you do eBay and buy stuff that has stuff written on it. These are awesome. I won't waste my time talking about these again, but these are something you'll need to watch that video. Brush-wise too, I've got one of these. This was actually a vintage like a sewing machine one. They've got newer ones of this. I've just had this for a while. It works great to dust out stuff that needs a little more force to get it out. This is cleaning vintage stuff. A lot of the irons and metal items you see in my videos and crank devices and electronics and stuff, I use these all the time. I've got bunches of these, not just this one, but this one just happened to be handy. These are, again, all things that I end up using constantly throughout the week. I use most of this at least once or so a week. All this stuff gets used throughout the week, though. Specialty erasers. This is Arabic, the dry cleaner. This one can be used on all kinds of stuff. It's not a typical one. You'll have to hunt one of these down at like an art supply store. But these work awesome on vintage plastic toys and things like that, especially the rubber toys. And along that line, too, for cleaning vintage paper, like a postcard, if it has writing that's in pencil, I usually erase the pencil writing on the back. Sometimes I'm lazy on that. It'll still sell that way, but it's an appearance issue, so I do erase things that are on paper if it's in pencil. Same with these kneaded erasers. If you don't know what a kneaded eraser is, these come in really handy for cleaning up all kinds of stuff from the antique area and paper. And then just a standard school eraser too. These work good too. And you can buy these at Walmart, these kind of things. Walmart may have these in a kit, but you can get them really cheap if you're just buying just the erasers. Same with these. And then the All Fix-It. Elmer's school glue is awesome, so I always keep some of this around. I do glue things back together sometimes depending on what it is. And this is DAP, and this is the Rapid Fuse. This one's probably one of the better ones. This and the Gorilla Glue 20-second one are the best two for gluing back plastics and stuff. There's one other one, I don't have the bottle handy, but it's plastic cement. And that thing, the item will break somewhere else before that glue ever comes off, and you can hit it with a hammer. Plastic cement. I think that plastic cement's by DAP too. That's the majority of the items that you're normally going to use. There's a couple other ones down here too. Now this is cutting boards. I have these in like 5 or 6 sizes. This one's been abused. You can see I've used this one thing. It's got some major cuts in it. These things keep on going though. You can find these sometimes used at crafters' garage sales, but I use this one all the time. And I've got paper cutters, the big industrial paper cutters. I've got one that's 18-inch and one that's 24-inch. Again, those are for cutting down like print ads and things like that, cutting magazine pages out. I usually will take the book, a magazine apart before I'll take the page out, and then literally cut it just a millimeter to the left or right of the centerfold, so I'm cutting out the staples but keeping the whole page itself. There is a trick to cutting down ads to make sure you're not messing them up at all. Don't cut them out of the book when they're still in the book or magazine, whatever you're doing. But again, different sizes of these. These come in handy all the time. And then lastly, I've talked about these two. This is a light table. You plug it in. It takes a elongated fluorescent or standardized tube. You can replace them with either or. This is just basically a light with the table face on it. I use this even for deciding where to cut things down sometimes. It's easy to see what's on the other side, so you're not having like a bleed through this way too, and you can avoid some issues. And plus I use these for 35mm slides. I've got a couple of these. My son even has one of these. If you're going to do this for a long time and you're going to be into this and you run into one of these, buy it. I hunted this one down locally, luckily, so I didn't have to pay much for it. I believe I got maybe $10 into this. This is a good one, though. This is a industrial one. You can use it for look at x-rays and all kinds of stuff. These come in handy. Come in very handy, actually. So anyway, transparencies, whatever you want to use these for. That's just the basics, though. Hopefully that gives you some ideas on some of the things you can use for fixing up stuff. And just something else you can look for when you're out, purchasing stuff. These will come in handy. I can guarantee you it in many, many different cases. Again, I use this kind of stuff all the time. Every single week, at least a day probably doesn't go by where I don't touch one of these items here, It's just that important to your business to have some extra stuff around if you're going to get into the antiques and collectibles, especially paper, and to be able to cut down print ads professionally and nicely. Don't use a pair of scissors on cutting paper down. It shows. You can see the line, and people sometimes are bothered by that. They like the complete full sheet, especially if they're going to frame it and mat it. It might be for a specific size where they need a huge piece of paper with the mat to fill up a spot on the wall. So just keep that in mind. Do it right. Do it professionally to the best of your ability. But again, Don the Auction Professor, hopefully that gives you some ideas. If you liked the video, please hit the like button below. Subscribe and tell a friend.